Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Michael Paul Miller, for installing the exhibit. That was really a huge effort on his part. I just dropped off all that big work and he put it up, so I appreciate his curating and installing it. Is that too loud for you? Is it about right? I'm going to talk about my journey as an artist, my connections with the Olympic Peninsula and Port Townsend, where we live now, started about 38 years ago. The first image there is 1980, which is when I finished my degree in Kansas, and we left the day after school was out and came back to the Northwest. We were ready to get out of Kansas. I was born in Pocatello, Idaho, raised there, and in Boise, Idaho. I finished my junior high and high school there, a couple of years of college. My father's work had transferred him to Boise, so I ended up finishing school there and going to college for a couple of years there. And then a few years later, I moved to Eugene, to the University of Oregon, and finished my BFA there. I had a great childhood for a shy, introverted, artistic kid. My father was a talented painter who painted landscapes and seascapes most of his adult life. He ended up not doing it as often as he began working full-time. But I always felt encouraged by him and by my mother, who I think would have been an architect or an interior designer if she wasn't raising 5 children. I didn't have much exposure to art as a child in Idaho. There wasn't much going on in Idaho. But my father, some encouraging teachers, some art books, and eventually art magazines, and sort of getting into the world of published information became really important to me. I craved image making as a child. That's one thing that I wanted to do and knew I could do. So it alleviated a lot of anxiety in my life about what I wanted to do. I knew I was an artist, but it also led to a lot of unrealistic expectations about who else cares about art or artists. When I moved to Eugene, my oldest first daughter was born there, and after finishing my BFA, I, with a good friend from Eugene, received a scholarship to go to the University of Kansas in Lawrence, over by the Missouri border. And I figured nobody was going to pay me to make art again, so if they were going to pay me to go to school, I'd do it. So we both went out there and finished our MFAs a few years later. And it was a very productive and challenging time to be in graduate school, because I developed an interest in ideas that became the core of my art making from then on, basically. I've come to think of my art making as having 3 general concerns. All of them have to do with suggesting movement and energy, and I've used different types of imagery to come through that way. Water is one of the major influences, landscapes, and what I call the cosmos, which can be either outer space or microspace, either one. I've started thinking recently, after quite a few years of art making, that my art is sort of like a ponytail that gets divided in parts and braided together. So the art interest in water may be the focus for a while, then an interest in landscape sort of becomes more prominent and overlaps and goes over or under, and then maybe the cosmos starts becoming interesting. So that kind of back and forth and over and under, all of it's interwoven and correlated. When we got back to the Northwest after Kansas, we found ways to survive in school, basically managing apartments and doing all sorts of other jobs. And we knew we wanted to be near an art city, So we came to Seattle and had applied for jobs managing apartments and had found a great complex on Lake Washington. We're ready to start the job in a week or two. And fate threw us a fastball, and I answered a little ad in the Seattle Times for a caretaker on Marrowstone Island, which we'd never heard of Marrowstone Island. We didn't know where Port Townsend was. We didn't know anything about it. We'd never traveled out that way at all. So we answered the ad. The people said, well, we are really looking for a retired couple. You're not quite what we were thinking of, but you're welcome to come out and look at it. So we drove out. It was when the Hood Canal Bridge was down, so we had to take 2 ferries, Bainbridge, and then go up to Low Falls South Point Ferry. So the old timers will remember that experience of having to take 2 ferries to get here and no bridge. When we got to Marrowstone Island, it was a 10-acre beachfront property with a bunch of little cabins, and they called it a resort. And my 5-year-old daughter, Laura, at that point, sort of swept the owners off their feet and charmed them so that they said, okay, I guess you can do this if you want. So we ended up there for the next 6 years, and it became one of the major changing points in my artwork because I had been an abstract painter for many years, but all of a sudden I was confronted with a powerful sunset landscape every evening where we were looking across Oak Bay to the Olympics. So I found ways to incorporate that, and I'll show you those images in a few minutes. I've taken a lot of art history over the years. I'm very interested in how the art world puzzle has fit together and fits together now. I'm especially interested in contemporary and modern art and Asian art, and I took most of those courses when I was in college. I decided pretty early on that contemporary art making was a commitment to exploration and discovery. And I've sometimes compared artists to scientists who come up with a theory or questions and set about finding ways to answer those questions. Jackson Pollock, an early modern painter, said, "The modern artist is working with space and time and expressing his feelings rather than illustrating." And that pretty much defines how I think about contemporary art. I'm trying to deal with issues that aren't easy to visually understand. So space, time, and expressing feelings are a lot of what my paintings are about. As Kate mentioned, I titled this show Navigations, Art Making in a Complex World. And I especially in the contemporary work, am trying to make sense of the barrage of information that we get visually from publications, TVs, movies, the internet, and at the same time keeping connected to nature and the environment. I also like the idea of the physical notion of navigating through the cosmos in a sci-fi sense of the word. I'm going to start with the images from graduate school, because when I ended up in Seattle, those were the images that I was proposing to galleries, and the imagery that started being shown first in my career in Seattle. So that first slide for context for the students, that was 1980, the year I completed my master's degree. So I'm an old timer. The imagery back then was very energetic, gestural abstraction. And you'll see as I go through these phases of the braid that I've created, that this kind of imagery surfaces repeatedly during the years. There's that actual painting, 66 by 95. And I have a lot of images, so I'm going to scoot through quite a few of them without much comment. I've tried to caption most of them in PowerPoint, so if you have questions and want to refer to one later, we can talk about it. There were two main bodies of work that I created in graduate school. The Waters series, which was the first year of graduate school, eventually morphed into this more abstracted group of work. But as things would have it, the work that generated the most interest at the galleries when I first presented imagery was the water series. So this is an early exhibit in 2005 at Patricia Cameron Gallery. And I always liked this picture. This was through the front window, but it showed the Space Needle behind it. She was down in that Lake Union district. That painting was called Killicit. I ended up naming most of the paintings for places around the Northwest, often bodies of water. Killicit is a bay on Marrowstone Island, Killicit Bay, Killicit Harbor. This is another group of paintings, again, pretty large scale. I was really having fun painting large in graduate school because we had big studios, we had incredible shops, so you could go create your stretcher bars and work with large scale paintings. This shows that painting, not a very good photograph, but at that exhibit with the waters paintings. This is a painting called Wanda Few Default, so I was referring back to the Northwest even when I was in Kansas, and I was referring to water where there was really very little water. But I'd grown up in Idaho swimming in pools, reservoirs, lakes, rivers. I always felt very attracted to water. And one of the main paintings in that exhibit was called Cité, which was based on swimming on the French coast at a place called Cité. And being enveloped in this incredible warm turquoise water was just an experience that stuck with me many years and became a reason for painting it later. This is just one of my granddaughter at the time. And there it is, seen, it's a little faded in that image, but you get a better sense of the imagery. So this painting has been one of the most interesting ones because so many people have responded to it that there's been the source of additional paintings based on it. And I'm going to show that sequence of events a number of times where I start out with an image that I create in the studio and then often when commissioned to create other pieces relating to it. This is one that was created for a Lincoln Square in Bellevue that was based on that painting, but they had things that they were interested in, the proportions. They wanted a certain scale and proportion. This is, I didn't put it on there, this is about 7 feet by 9 feet in 3 panels. And of course the palette they wanted shifted slightly. And a lot of people don't enjoy working on commissions. I have great fun doing it. It's revisiting something that I enjoy and finding a new way of reconfiguring it. This is one that was commissioned for Providence Hospital in Everett. It's very close to the original except for the proportions and the intensity of the color shifted. That's the actual piece without Carol in the picture. So that painting went from about 8 feet tall to about half that size, but almost as long, so it got shifted in proportions. And we went on our honeymoon to Hawaii, so that blue water again started cropping up in other imagery. This is a smaller piece. And that Cité painting was commissioned for the Providence Hospital. A person in Denver saw it and contacted me and had me create a painting for their home. It was about 4.5 by 6 feet. Other paintings in that first exhibit, Patricia Cameron. This is Kai Tai, which is the name of the lagoon in Port Townsend. A lot of these are Indian names. This was a commission based basically on that water painting, but they wanted a fire image, so it got altered again. And they had this odd notion of creating 3 different sized panels, which I thought was kind of peculiar, but it ended up looking fine. There's the center panel from that series. And then people in Bellevue saw that fire painting at the Elements 2 building and wanted a commission. So this is based on that for a smaller residential painting. That first painting, one of the first paintings I showed you was One Few Default, and that was the painting that this government agency liked as the impetus for a commission painting for the Kids at Government building. So this is a triptych. You can't really see the seams. I often painted multiple panels so that I could get a large image, but make it transportable. And I usually don't separate them. I just paint across the whole image. As you saw it in the lobby, some of those are painted that way. So Wanda Few Default was sort of about undersea in Puget Sound and how we live on a volcanic fault line. And at some point there may be magma coming up through there. And I would often work on small pieces that would become the basis for a larger piece further on. So this small 2x4 foot painting was seen by a couple who commissioned this piece for their residents. Very, very similar palette. This is a funny story because when we went to measure this alcove, it was built specifically for the painting they wanted. And once they picked me, I went and consulted with them and measured the alcove. So I was up there on a ladder with my tape measure and reading off the measurements, and the owner's wife there was writing them down. Well, come to find out, one of us made a mistake. Either I read it wrong or she wrote it down wrong. And when I got finished painting to the house, it was too big for the alcove. So that painting got repainted, and I used to call this What She Said, because it was like, yeah, that's not what you said. So this painting, the oversized painting, got repainted with, I call it language glyph marks across there in white, sort of like a conversation woven into a watery stream. And I experimented with lots of color variations. This is all different metallics over a reddish base. So those paintings had mostly been done in Kansas or were reframed very directly to Kansas. But when we got to Marrowstone Island, I was still very actively painting. And I had some large stretchers that I brought back with me, so I started painting a few paintings based on the imagery there on Marrowstone Island. And next to our house, we had this swale between two, sort of a gully going down to the beach. And one day I walked through and saw this red sailboat out there. So that is the sort of thing that encourages me to make a painting. So this painting also, we had our third child here. Nicholas was born in Kansas. Lizzie was born while we lived on Marrowstone. So they came over to the studio and I traced their 3 handprints at the bottom there of that tree. And I used sort of abstracted notions of trees here. The form on the right, I felt was sort of a fir tree. Another one of that same size, the same period, was this one from the bridge. There's a bridge going across from the mainland to Indian Island, then onto Marrowstone. So every time you would go back and forth, you would see down the waterway. So Mount Rainier, you could see sitting way down at the end of the long bay. And this is like a boat going under a bridge. And this head shape, oh, there is a cursor. So this head and shoulder shape is like putting me into the location. So jumping back to some of the paintings I was doing in graduate school, the second body of work, so there's the water paintings that transferred eventually into